case that last little bit was chopped off here, I'm doing this in about 20-minute bites here because I'm not sure how long I have, and I'm trying to exercise this in small enough parts that I can make corrections if I need to. You use your senses to find out what the substance is. So your senses are the things that connect primarily to the thing, and so the properties. What I mean is you use your senses to connect primarily to the properties. So imagine something in a sense that the substance, in some sense, is surrounded or clothed, as Aquinas puts it, clothed by the properties. The properties exist around the substance, and the substance is clothed by these properties. Now, that's difficult to say that way. That's not quite right, because would not be proper to say that the water is inside the water, inside of the properties. The properties surround the water in some way. It's not meant to be exactly in those words. Rather, we're using the word in an analogous way, talking about somehow the substance is within the properties. The properties are revealing to us what is inside. So the properties of this reveal to us that it is water. Now the properties are the things that I sense. So my senses, my sight, my touch, my taste, my hearing, those sorts of things, those senses connect to the properties. The properties come into the senses, and that's what our senses connect to. And as I said, the senses feed the intellect. The intellect comes to a knowledge of the world through the senses, and no other way. And so somehow there's this connection here, and I'm going to change markers here. Somehow there's this connection. The intellect knows the substance. I know that that's water. But the means by which that comes about is through the senses and the properties. So the properties reveal the substance within. And it is only through knowledge of the properties that I can understand what that substance is. And the understanding does not happen in the sense powers of the mind, but happens in the intellect. The intellect knows the substance through the senses which connect to the properties that reveal the substance within. Okay. So that's important to recognize when you're doing science, because after all, we're talking about scientia, knowledge, and we're talking about the physical world. Okay, so we talked about some substances and some properties. Notice that substances, all of these substances that I showed up here, have something very simple in common. They all have extension. They have size. And so there's something very fundamental about extension. They all have parts outside of each other. So a person has parts, and the parts are outside of each other. I have water here has parts. I could subdivide. I could divide this water. It is divisible. I could pour half some of this water into another container. And I have some water here and some water there. So it is potentially divided. It is divisible. And in fact, that's intimately connected with the changeability. This water is changeable in some simple ways. One is I can move it around. And as I said, I could divide it. Would still be water in this case. Dividing a person is another thing. You could do some division. And obviously there's a certain point, which we will talk about as we get into this, when it's no longer a person. You've done something destructive to the person. But water, I can do. It's primitive enough. I can divide it. Now, there might be a limit to the division where I divide it into such a small part that it may not be water anymore. So that's something we have to keep into account, even with water. Okay. So the parts of the water and the parts of a person, something that we're going to talk about. The parts of a person are obviously organized. In fact, that's the word, organ, was coined by Aristotle to describe exactly that. I have parts that are organized to different functions. They have different powers. I have eyes. I have ears. I have the senses that we were talking about. I have skin. I have bones. I have muscle. I have lungs. These things have different functions, different powers. But they all act together. In fact, they are all organized and subsumed into the being of the person. So the parts themselves are not actually separate from me. They are within me, and they are all part of me. Part of me being, in a real sense, very much, as I said, subsumed into the being of the person. So we also have this ability to describe the parts of substances. And that's important to recognize. That comes primarily from the fact that substances have extension. If things didn't have extension, then we wouldn't be able to talk about its parts. Okay. It's also true that having these parts allows us to change the thing. If it didn't have parts, it wouldn't change. If I'm going to change something, I can take it apart, for example. I could take the water apart. But the fact that it has this extension allows it to be changeable, to be changed, and therefore makes it a physical thing. So extension and being physical are intimately connected. Okay, so that brings us then to talking about groups of substances. So I have, for example, I could have, let's see, let's stick with natural things. Let me take as an example of something which is a group of natural substances, a flock of birds. There's a very simple example. Each bird is a substance. I have a group of substances loosely connected. Maybe only socially that's a connection, but it's a loose connection because I can take a bird from that flock, put it in a cage somewhere else, take it, release it in an entirely different place. It's still a bird. What I have removed from the group has not changed in a fundamental way. It's still a bird, still that same particular bird. So there's been no fundamental change by removing it from the group. So that reveals to you that the connection there is a loose connection. So that means, therefore, what I had was a group of substances. That is, a flock of birds is a group of individual substances. Now let's take a different example. Let's look at a person with parts. Now I can take a part off. To do that, I have to do violence to the thing. Take off a finger, which does happen. People lose fingers in accidents. So, take that finger. Has that finger changed in a fundamental way? Well, yes, it has. And in fact, you can tell that almost right away. It starts to change almost immediately. It starts falling apart. It starts decomposing. It no longer has the ability to hold itself together, which it did before when it was still part of me. Now, I have not changed in a fundamental way. I've lost a finger, but I'm still a person. But that thing is no longer a part of a person. It was. It's the remains of a part of a person. So it will now start falling apart. In fact, it reveals, if you watch it, you understand by studying it that it's actually now become a group of substances itself, because there's no unity present in the thing. It's falling apart. It has nothing there to keep it together as a whole, as a one. But I'm still a one. I've lost a finger, but I'm still a one person. I have not lost my unity, not in a fundamental way. I've lost a sense of unity. I don't have what I should have, which is that digit, pointer finger. So I've lost something, but not in a fundamental way. I haven't lost what it means fundamentally to be a person, but that stuff, that thing which was part of me, has now become something fundamentally different. In fact, it has become a group of substances. Okay, so the way you can tell, so we have an analogy here. A group of substances is analogous to a single substance with parts. But the analogy only goes so far. It's not a very good analogy. It's not very deep, not very profound. Because I can remove a member of a group of substances, and that member does not change in a fundamental way. But if I remove a part from a single substance, substances have parts. If I remove a part from that single substance, like a finger off of a person, that part that I remove will change in a fundamental way. That's how you know, revealed by watching it, looking at it, observing it, experimenting with it, that it is a part of a single substance and not a member of a group of substances. Okay, but that allows us then to talk about things. That analogy that I just made is called system. We give it a name. It's a system. So I'm going to use in physics a generic system. It is going to be something which, hello. It's gone to sleep on me here. That's interesting. Maybe the mouse will still work. Let's see. Yeah, the mouse maybe still works. Let's see. Yeah, mouse works. Is it back? Okay. Now, the point. But this has gone to sleep. Interesting. All right, so I won't write the word right now. I'll have to come figure out what happened there. Podium stopped working. Oh, it went away. Oh, it's got a little X down there. I have to turn this off and turn this back on. And then it should come back up. That's interesting and annoying. Okay, there we go. Yes, okay. System. System is a generic. So, again, systems exist only in the mind. Generics exist only in the mind as generics. Animal, as a generic animal, exists only in the mind as a generic. Only particular individual animals exist in the world. So this is a generic, a system. And in the system, I'm going to I'm going to treat groups of substances and a single substance with parts as though they were the same kind of thing, because they have kind of these parts which I can kind of do something like I can take a part away. I can take a member out, take a part out, and I'm ignoring the fact that there's now been a significant change, a fundamental change in the part, but I'm going to treat these groups as though a group of substances and a single substance with parts as though they were the same. So that's generic. So it's an analogy. The primary meaning applies to a single substance when I'm dealing with things. Primarily, I'm dealing with single substances. I'm going to extend this understanding of a single substance as having parts to a group of substances. But the primary meaning is always back to a single substance. So when I'm talking about system, primarily I mean a single substance, but I can extend that to a group of substances. Okay, in the same way, I have another generic, body, which is a generic changeable thing. So I'm not going to make any distinction between a falling boy and a falling ball. They're going to be treated in the same way by considering them, calling them body. Now, it may be important under certain circumstances to remember the distinction. The boy is not the same thing as a ball. But for the purposes of some discussions, I will treat them the same. That is, body. They're both bodies. So a body is a generic. Again, generics exist only in the mind as generics. Okay, now having discussed then substances with some sort of detail here, the next thing we need to discuss is properties. And we're going to discuss certain kinds of properties. And in fact, we're going to discuss properties going to place them into categories. Let's see here. Can I do this? Seems like, here we go. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to introduce properties by a mnemonic. QQ rare poet, which is really stupid, but memorable. Maybe because it's so stupid. It makes no sense, but people seem to remember it. And so I'm going to introduce the properties are going to be categorized according to their types. These are the things that we can say about a substance, like it's red, for example, or it's big, or it's here, or it's there, or it's other things you can say about it. Now, they're broadly speaking going to be placed into two general kinds of categories. The first two are called intrinsic, which means they deal with a single substance by itself. The others are extrinsic, meaning that they deal with relations between substances in some way. Okay, so let's start with the intrinsic ones. Have to do with just the substance itself. Let's just talk about things we can say about itself without reference in any way to anything else. And these first two categories are quantity and quality, and these do not mean what you think, especially quantity is not what you think. I can almost guarantee that nobody in this room except somebody who's had this course would understand what I'm talking about when I talk about quantity and quality. Quantity goes back to the understanding that things have extension. So quantity is primarily extension. And so I could just stop with that and say it's extension. So I could be linear extension, like a ruler has length. It could be areal extension, surface extension, so it has area, or three-dimensional extension, it has volume. Now notice that these are not primarily numbered. So quantity is not primarily numbered. Quantity is primarily extension. And in fact, this is one of those things that's so primitive, I almost don't have words to describe it in a more simple way. I have to make use of gestures like this that tap into your mind the same experiences that I have had with the physical world. Length, area, volume. You have to know what those mean because you've lived in the world. But quantity is not primarily extension. Now, you might say, in some sense related to this, you could, in simple terms, say it answers the question, how much? How much of it? So size has something to do with extension. Now, quality, by contrast, has to do with mode or manner. Or in other words, it might answer how. Quality, there are lots of qualities. Color, texture, are the examples. Taste. Powers are qualities. So we will encounter lots of qualities when we're discussing properties. Quantity is also very fundamental. So these are the two intrinsic categories, and I'll quickly go through the other ones here because I'm going to be running out of time on my recording. The ordering of these categories is important. And it's important to know the order, and that's why the mnemonic is helpful. The others are relation, action, reception, place, orientation, environment, and time. Those are the extrinsic properties, categories of properties. Relation, similar to cause of, different than. Those are relations. Okay, now I'm going to quit here while I'm ahead.